Tuhan tadi kita beliau itu kali ya di nama.
Diaspora writing.
Okay. So whether it is it's the same tune or is a different tune, you can tell when you speak different language. So obviously it applies to writing as well, because it has different audience and maybe different structure as well sometimes. Well, I have given here a basic sort of information about the writing I have come across in different South Asian languages, particularly Urdu, Punjabi, the Pakistani side, and Bahari Meetri and Potwari. I can't read Punjabi, Gurmukhi, or Hindi, or Bangla, or Gujarati, but of course there is a lot of literature has been produced in those languages as well here. But I don't qualify to cover those languages. So I will just briefly, as you can say from these languages which are taught at okay. Sorry, these are all the salespeople. Yeah. But I don't have slide for those languages, but these are the languages which are taught at the School of Oriental and African Studies, SOAS. Bengali, Gujarati, Hindi, Nepali, Pali, Punjabi, Prakrit, Sanskrit, Sinhala, Tamil, and Urdu. And from my experience here in Britain, I have learned that there is one of the largest languages of British South Asians remain invisible and is mainly spoken only. And that is my mother tongue. And I did not know about it till I migrated to Britain and met some Pakistani and Kashmiri activists here. So these languages are used in different spheres, or there are different sites of where these languages are used. Obviously, translation, that is mainly in, sorry. Oh, I'm going fast. Yeah, there's mainly translation and teaching, which is obviously mainly in high schools and colleges, and then there is literature that has different spheres where it's dealt with. Some research happens in universities and is analyzed, in academic spheres such as SOAS. And there is a writing of these languages in domestic and community spheres, and there are several writers across Britain who write in these languages. And then there is a public performance, particularly poetry reciting in mushairas. And I am not aware of any publishing resources of South Asian languages in Britain. Publishing is mainly arranged from back home. And the poetry in different forms I have come across in these languages, Urdu, Punjabi, Bahari, and Potwari, there is mainly romantic poetry. There is some political, and there is also some religious poetry, Naat and Sufi writing, and then there is a comical or satirical. And the prominent poets, there is long list of poets in North, Midland, and South who write poetry in these languages. But I'm not going in too much detail about that, due to time constraint. And in the prose writing, I have come across novels, mainly in Urdu, but also now in other languages, short stories, and then dramas, and people's life stories and memoirs, and then migration histories. And there are also some books appeared recently on social history of people's area of origin. And then there is religious preaching literature. And then I have a list of prominent prose writers who have written different sort of forms. There is one very detailed history of migration. It's called Pakistan se Hindustan Tak. That gives the detailed history of migration and settlement of South Asian, while it mainly focuses on Pakistanis and Kashmiris. But it has some comparison with the English version of Asian in Britain by Rosina Wisram. And then there is a very classic reportage that was written about 50 years ago by a writer based in Birmingham, Mahmood Hashmi, who at that time was in Kashmir, and it's called Kashmir Udas Hai. But now, then he has added, after 50 years, he has added a couple of more chapters where he writes about people's here who migrated here and their stories and how they were settling in, and it is a very interesting read. Then of course we have Abdullah Hussain and Safia Siddiqui. Abdullah Hussain is a novelist, and maybe Anita will talk about him more. And Safia Siddiqui, she has written short stories, and I don't know whether she has written any novel. And then there are personal stories of people who migrated. One of them migrated in the early 1940s, and he wrote his story. His name is Muhammad Yusuf, and his book is called Diaspora, the story of Yusuf. But obviously that has a connection with Yusuf Zalaika, because that was one of the major piece of literature available to people before 47, along with Sahmanut and Hiranja and other epics like that. And it narrates the story of how he went from a village in Mirpur to Bombay to work on the merchant navy ships, and from there he went to USA, and from there he came to Britain, and then he went back to Kashmir in late 90s. And then we have some social histories. My main kind of interest is in Pahari Pochwari writing, and there is still a debate, there is still a debate amongst the speakers of this language and the writers of this language, that whether Punjabi, Pahari, Pochwari, Hindko and Dogri are dialects of Punjabi or of Pahari or Pochwari, are they predated Punjabi that was in fact grown out of these languages. So these debates are ongoing thing. But one thing is very clear, that all of these languages are mutually understandable. And some writers like Akhtar Imam Rizvi describe these languages as a family of languages. And if we compare the literature produced in these languages with other mainstream South Asian languages like Hindi or Urdu, so obviously there is not much literature produced in these languages. Because one of the main reasons is that in India, are those Kashmiris who come from Indian side are there, they are taught in schools to read Hindi and Urdu, and those in Pakistan or on the Pakistani side of Kashmir, they are taught to read and write in Urdu. So this situation initially was replicated here in Britain as well. People were seen as, they're speaking of, either they speak Hindi or Urdu, or from Indian side, the Gujarati and then Bangla and Punjabi languages asserted themselves and became recognized. But Pahari and Potwari continuously struggling to get some recognition. When I came to Britain, I was very kind of proud that I'm very well literate in Urdu, and I had my English was not very good. It's still not very good, and I had some complex about that as well. You know, going through the schooling there, the English was seen as something not learnable, and but here I had to learn writing in my mother tongue, because when I came here, I saw that there is some kind of complex in people about this language, and if there are about 20 people sitting in a room, all Pahari speakers, and one person comes in, either Urdu speaker or Punjabi speaker, they will all try to speak Urdu or Punjabi. And when obviously some of them can't speak properly, so when that person or person will move, they then laugh at each other that you can't speak it right and you can't speak it right. And when you ask them which language you speak, they will say we speak Punjabi. So this kind of situation, when some friends of I met here, we thought maybe the one reason is that because this language, particularly Poshwari and Pahari, is not written, so therefore people don't see it as a language. So we thought to start writing this language. We came up with an alphabet, and alphabet was used, which is also used in Urdu and based on Arabic and Persian. But obviously we have certain sounds for which Urdu does not have letters, so we created 2 new letters to have our own alphabet. And due to the latest developments in technology, we were able to write it better, and we produced the first Pahari Poshwari magazine from Manchester in 1990s. It was called Chitka, and Chitka is a very peculiar Pahari word, and it means the sunshine in the winter mornings. And at that stage, we have this friend of ours, Ali Adalat, born in Azad Kashmir in a village, in a remote village, and he migrated to Britain in I think 1970s. And he was a good friend, but he was very critical of our efforts to write this language, because he said because he said that it will distract, because we were part of Kashmir movement as well, so he said it will distract people here in Britain from the Kashmir struggle, and it will create divisions and all that. And obviously we were not convinced, and so we carried on. And his other argument was that this language cannot be written, and even if you write it, who will read it? But interestingly, his wife, who is literate only in Quranic Arabic, she can read Quran, she managed to read a story published in Chitka. It called Masi Janto Bus Podi. Auntie General rode the bus. And whether it was because of this incident or because all of his friends were in this Chitka magazine committee, so he also joined us. And surprisingly, he was the first person who wrote, when he started writing, he wrote, he had his book published, the collection of his short stories, in 1999, and it was called Punch Na Sarmad, the Chief of Punch. And obviously, it was not, maybe it would have taken a lot longer to have his work published if it was not Baba Akhtar Imam Rizvi, who is no more with us, who was working for the development of Potwari in Pakistan, and especially on Radio Pakistan, where he worked as, retired as chief executive. He visited in Britain in 1997 to attend a South Asian literary conference in Oldham, and he had opportunity to read some of Adalat's work. So then he was so impressed, and he said, "This is very good writing, and I'm going to arrange for its publication." So he did it. And that was his first book, Punchna Sarmal. And in 2002, another of his book was published called Taharani Ag, The Fire in the Mountains. And again, Akhtar Imam Rizvi made all the arrangements for its publication. And the first one had 8 stories, the second one had 11 stories. And then after about 3-4 years, he had his first novel published, Mela Asman, The Dirty Sky. And this was again published by Akhtar Imam Rizvi. And this is the story of British underclass in the back streets of Rochdale that deals with marginalization, exclusion, racism, internal prejudices, which we were talking about earlier, of the South Asians, and hypocrisy of religious and other affluent people who still have those some of the baggages with them, and sometimes it comes to play here in different situations. And later his writing was reached out to the Indian side of Kashmir, and a special number of very featured journal was dedicated to his writing and his analysis. And then he wrote a Pahari film. One was 2 Pahari films. One was a musical, Mehndi Lande, Let Me Put Henna On, and then the feature film, Laki, The Line. And he has recently finished another novel which I have typed, and I think that is going to be a classic of Pahari writing. So this was the guy who said, my writing. And so I will read a few, just maybe a couple of paragraphs from one of his stories, which became very popular, and it is from his first collection, Punchna Sarmal. The story is read in groups at various places in Azad Kashmir and Potwar. It is called Bagheni Pug, the turban of Bagha. Bagha is the name of a person. It is narrated from the memories of the author of the period just before the construction of Mangla Dam in Mirpur, which submerged this ancient town of Kashmir and nearly 300 surrounding villages. The story is about a man called Bagha, who is a livestock trader and a great storyteller. So when he tells people of Arthur's village about the rumors of building a dam on the river Jhelum, people take it as another of his stories and laugh at the idea of stopping the river, and that too of mighty Jhelum. However, when they could see the mechanical giants moving around Mirpur city, they started believing Bagha, and the thought of losing the city and surrounding area generated a great deal of anxiety and fear among people. It captures the graphic detail of the drowning of life bit by bit in water and the breakup of social fabric rooted in centuries. Its climax is when the shocks of seeing Mirpur drowning in water before his eyes cripples Bagha, and he paralyzes him, and he becomes ill and bedridden within days, and sends his son to see the drowning of his village, Babiam. And upon their return, Bagha asked them about the minute details of how the water swallowed each and everything of Babiam. But the paragraphs I have translated and going to read are about a woman whose father dies just before the water rises, and she wants to bury him outside the area that was demarcated to be submerged in the Mangla lake. But the peer of that area, who was to lead the funeral prayer, Janaza, brands this desire as un-Islamic, but later when he realizes that the grave of his father was also going to become underwater, he turns the removal of his father's body from grave into a mass event of spirituality, and, and claimed that those who witness this great transfer are the most fortunate people. I don't think I could do justice with the translation, but I hope that some meanings will be conveyed. The author writes that this took me back several years to the day when I went to a funeral with my mother in the Ara village before it was surrounded by the Mangla lake. The village was almost deserted. People had started to salvage whatever they could of their homes. The deceased sons were pleading to be allowed to bury their father outside of the area that was to be submerged. His daughter was wailing and saying, "Oh father, I don't know where I would be ended up. I don't know if I would ever be able to visit your grave." The daughter lived just outside the demarcated area. All the family members were pleading to be allowed to bury him outside of the area that were to come under water. Having heard all this wailing and pleadings, the local peer who was to lead janaza became hysterical and said, "Oh, you ignorant, irrational beings, listen to me. What you are asking for is against the law of Shariat, the ways of Islam. The deceased will be buried right here, or go and find someone else to lead the funeral prayers." The daughter of the deceased started wailing loud, "Oh, my beloved father, had I been aware of this cruelty, I would have carried you to my own home before your soul left your body." The peer, telling her off, shouted, "Oh girl, don't commit blasphemy. The dead belong to the earth. This soil was written in his destiny from the day one." This made Baga jump. Settling his turban on his head, he said, if this soil was written in his destiny, then this too would have been written, that this land will not be flooded and stay free for people to grow sugarcane, the sweet sugarcane. Don't know what more he would have been said, but someone put hand on his mouth and silenced him. But his words were picked up, and in the next Friday prayer, the Imam of local mosque said in his sermon, "Those who utter this kind of thoughts are pure kafirs, irreligious, like the white man. All non-believers have become one. Look at the graves of those who had power. The water bare touches them. The bulldozers don't go near them." The people shouted slogan to that, but Baga was thinking what his elders did wrong, why their bones were so weak. Then he started repeating this outside of the mosque, in every gathering, in every meeting. No one answered his question, but he kept repeating it like a broken record. He kept asking, "Someone tell me, make me understand, why are we drowned like this? Are we the pharaohs?" He kept asking questions and water kept rising. The area kept drowning, villages after villages. Everyone was on the move. There were few people who stayed put in the village with Baga. All preparations were completed. The time of the rising of the water to Baga's village, Babiam, was fixed. Suddenly, mosques started making announcements. Whoever wants to see the miracles, come to the shrine of beads on Sunday and see how the beautiful God keeps his own people protected in their graveyards. It was announced that the Buzurg of Pir Sahib, father of the local Pir, came in someone's dreams and asked to be taken out of the reach of water. To this, Baga thought, God can do everything. Possibly he won't let water flow forward. May his ancestors also come in his dreams, but they did not. On Sunday, he too went to the shrine. A huge crowd was gathered. The body was taken out, but the arrangements were such that no common person was left near the grave. Someone said conversation could be heard from inside the grave. Soon this was repeated everywhere, and drums and flutes were started playing and slogans were shouted. That girl too came to the gathering without any head covering. She was wailing, "Oh my beloved father, they buried you there where you will be soon in water, but they have taken their own father away. Tell me, my father, what can I do?" Some people started saying, "She has lost it. She's gone mad. What is the comparison of your father with the great spiritual being?" On that day, Baga, who never took off his turban, took it off to cover the head of that girl. "My child, What you were saying is truth. But what is the value of truth today? Keep quiet, my child. Stay quiet.